Now, I have given a lot of thought to this question. Why do composers write songs in keys that are filled with sharps and flats? Like the chords I just showed you. And the only answer I can come up with is basically ego. Because, and what the composer says to himself is, if anyone wants to play my magnificent music, I will make them work like hell to do it, because the absolute genius of my creation deserves a huge effort on their part. I don't know of any other explanation for why so much music is written in these god-awful keys. Even, for example, if a song involves lyrics, so you have to have a vocalist. Some vocalists have a limited range. And so I could understand a composer putting a song in something other than C, because the singer cannot handle the high notes or the lowest notes. And that's one reason. But instead of moving it to the key of G, which is about halfway up the C scale, they write the song in F sharp. There's no singer on earth who would, if they can sing it in F sharp, they can easily sing it in G, and they can easily sing it in F. So why didn't the composer write it in F or G? Those are simple chords, basically. They're not as simple as the C chords, but they are extremely simple in comparison to F sharp or B or any of those god-awful keys. And no vocalist on the planet would know there was any difference between singing something in G or F instead of F sharp, or if you prefer calling it G flat. So that leaves us with the dilemma of getting songs from whatever key they're written in your songbook or on the sheet music that you buy, taking those notes and chords and getting them into the key of C. And this is where we get back to the half steps and the whole steps. And this is where it's really important. Transposing at first is a pretty cumbersome thing, and it takes some effort, and it takes some time. But the process is not complicated. It's actually quite simple. It just is time consuming. And I have done a great deal of it. I've transposed probably, if it's in F or G or B flat, I don't bother to transpose it. I've reached that point in life where I'm comfortable with those three other keys. If it's written in any other key, and there's 9 other keys available, I transpose, which means that I take what I find in a songbook and I transpose the melody into the key of C and the chords into the key of C. And once I'm in the key of C, it's a cakewalk to play it. Because I'm familiar with the chords, how to shape them. I'm familiar with what they sound like when I play them correctly. I may already have a very good idea of what the melody is without even reading the treble clef. But lots of times, if I don't know the melody that well, I also I transpose the treble clef melody first, and then I transpose the chords. So, I will show you samples. The first thing you need to do is to go out and buy, what did I call it? blank musical manuscript paper. That's a mouthful. And for such a big, long name, it's incredibly simple. That's it. That's what blank musical manuscript paper looks like. Before you do anything else, once you buy a pad of this, you take out one page, you ought to put a treble clef at the beginning of every one of these. You don't need to put sharps or flats because you're going to transpose everything into the key of C, which has no sharps and flats except in the middle of the song. There may be sharps and flats, but not at the very beginning. There's the scale and the major C chord have no sharps or flats. So go ahead and put little treble clefs there. Now, if you can, you'd probably be better off to get a version that is bigger, like this, because then you're not having to write such tiny notes and you just have more room to work. And so that's the first thing you need to start transposing, is blank musical manuscript paper. I hope I'm done with that. Now, one of the songs that I played much earlier to demonstrate that I was not a total fraud was Amazing Grace. And we're going to call that your sample, okay? And that's the song that you have found in one of your songbooks, and you want to play it. You just, not the way I did, because I embellished the living daylights out of it, but you want to play it just basically so that you can then turn it into what you want it to sound like. You still have to use the same basic chords, you have to use the same basic melody, but there's a million things you can do with it, and that's why you want to get to the point where you can play it very simply and basically. So, in your sample though, I didn't pick a song and a version of Amazing Grace out of one of your songbooks that was written in the key of C, which is where you want to learn it. I found a version, which is a bald-faced lie, that is in the key of A, which is not an easy key. It's not the hardest key on the piano, but it has 3 sharps, which makes it relatively unpleasant, and the chord symbols would look like those, a lot more like those nightmares that I showed you just earlier. So you take a blank piece of your manuscript paper, put a treble sign down, Amazing Grace is in 3/4 time. So after you have written the treble sign at the beginning of the top staff, so you know you're in the treble clef always, Amazing Grace happens to be 3/4 time. It's waltz time. It goes Amazing Grace 3, complete the sound, and so on and so forth. You count to 3 over and over and over again. And that's what it will be in every measure, is 3 beats. Now we get back to the most important single sheet that I have, the keyboard, and the notes down here. This is what's on the paper. This is what's on the key, on the piano, the keys. You understand half steps and whole steps. That's a half step. Now we need to look at your sample. And remember, your sample is out of I've blown it up. I've written it for you. It's the top staff of the sheet I'm going to show you. And it is the first part of Amazing Grace, written in the key of A. So the first thing you do is, you know it's in the key of A, and you're trying to get to C. You don't want to read it in A, you want to read it in C. Well, how do you do that? Well, you count half steps and whole steps. Half step, half step, half step. It is 3 half steps to get from A to C. That is absolutely crucial. And that's the heart and soul of transposing. And that's how we transpose the melody. Well, how do we transpose the chords? Well, the same way. If the song starts on an A major scale and you're trying to get to C, you count up 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. So that the same rule applies to the chords as it does the melody. So here's your sample, and beneath it is the same exact thing in the key of C. Now, you know this is a treble clef. These are totally separate. This is the key of A, which you can tell from the 3 sharps here at the beginning. This is in the key of C, which is what you want to learn it in, and so it says nothing there. When you read the music out of your songbook, you see 2 rests and a quarter note. Well, you know that in each measure, this is a measure, this is a measure, this is a measure, this is a measure. There are 3 beats in every measure. I'm going to introduce a new one that is somewhat disconcerting to me, but I'll explain it. So the first 2 beats of Amazing Grace are silent. Those are quarter note rests. The first note is a quarter note, and it's in the key of A. The first note is an E. And that's the first syllable of amazing. So what do we do with this piece down here? Let's pretend it's blank right now. Well, how many half steps do we have to deal with? There are 3 half steps between A and C. So you start with E, a half step gets you to F, a half step gets you to F sharp, and a half step gets you to G. Remember, there's 2 notes in here. You got the natural F and the F sharp in that space. And that's 3. 1, 2, 3. You don't count the E that you start with. You count the F sharp, and the G. And that's the 3 half steps. So what do you do down here? Well, you know how to read a treble clef, so you can write a treble clef too. You use a quarter note, you put 2 rests in at the beginning, and you put a G. It's not a G sharp, or there's no sharp or flat there. There's no sharps or flats here. It's just a G. So the next note in this Amazing Grace in the key of A is a half note, 2 beats, on the key that is A. Well, how do we get that to C? Exactly the same way. 3 half steps. You start out with A, you don't count it. You got B, which is 1, B flat, which is 1, B natural, which is 2, and C. So you come down here and you put a half note identical to that, but you put it on the C line because that's 3 half steps above the A. Now, this is what is disconcerting to me because I read music so poorly. I believe that this, which I wrote it this way, is called a triplet. And what it is 3 notes, and this is how it's shown. They use quarter notes, but they put a bracket up here with a 3 in it. And that means that those 3 notes get 1 beat. And I don't know how you write that, but I think I got it right. That if you put this box up here with the 3 in it, that means those are all just played like that. So this is the first 2 beats of that measure, may, and then zing is these 3 notes, and each one of them, you put them on in your key of C in exactly the same way. Up here you have a C. You want to, I'm sorry, on the, in the key of A, this note is actually a C sharp. So it's C sharp, and then you go to D, then you go to D sharp, and then you go to E, and that's 3 half steps. And that's how this A moves up to this C. Again, there's no sharps or flats to deal with. And this B becomes D, and this A becomes C. So you've gone from here to here in the key of A and turned it into the key of C. And you continue doing that in exactly the same way. How many half steps? And remember, this is the A scale. So this is a C sharp. How many half steps from a C sharp, not counting the C sharp, does it take to get 3 half steps? And you get to E natural. Same with this, B becomes D. Again, you have to use the same number of beats by using the same kind of note, half note, quarter note. And you have to mark your measures so that you can keep count exactly the same way. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you just keep doing that. There's another triplet here. And I've written out the lyrics so that they are right beneath the notes that go with those lyrics. In other words, sweet, as in sweet the sound, that sweet is an A in the key of A, and it's a C in the key of C. And that's how you finish the entire song in the treble clef. And you run into duplication, so you don't have to count to 3 for every single note. In other words, every place you see an E on this A version of Amazing Grace, you look down and you made a G out of it. So let's go along here. There's another E. We don't have to count. Just come down and put another G, just like that one, except it's a whole half note instead of a quarter note. And those are the only 2 E's in the key of A that I see. But let's look at C. This is C sharp. No, what am I saying? This is A. So it's not sharp, it's the key it's in. And you have that A, you have another A, the C sharp, which is here in the key of A, of course, becomes an E, which you can see here. And where else do we find that note? That's an E, there's an E, there's another E, there's another E. That's how you do the entire melody. Now, how do you do the chords? The chord symbols also, just like these notes are tied to the lyrics, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The chords are exactly the same. This is when you play each chord. Playing it in the key of A, your songbook tells you it's an A major chord. When you get to grace, it's an A seventh. Okay, the battery ran out and we've put in a new battery, and I was just working on chords and was explaining that the chord symbols that you will find on your songbook versions, which this is, except I created it, the chord symbols also are tied to the lyrics. So that you change from an A major to an A seventh on the word grace. You change from an A seventh to a D major on the word sweet. You change back to the A major on the word sound. And here's a tricky one, F minor, F sharp minor seventh. That's one of the reasons we stay away from the key of A, and E seventh. You don't have to learn any of those chords, maybe this one and this one. Those are two of the 32, this one also. It's irrelevant almost, because what we're doing is transposing these chords into the key of C. And what I told you was 3 half steps up to get from A to C. So you're in the same situation as you are right here. This is A, and you count up 3 half steps to C. Here, it's the same thing. A, you count up 3 half steps to C. It's still a major chord, but it's now a C major chord instead of an A major chord. You get to the next chord, and it's A seventh. Remember, that's the one where the 7th note of the scale is flatted. Well, you just change the A to C, you still use the 7, and it still fits in the same line above the word grace, because you can write your own lyrics down here a second time if you want, but I started having trouble finding room for all the words that went in there. D major, count up 3 half steps and you get to F major, F, that's the only thing you change. A major becomes a C major. F sharp minor 7th, you count up 3 half steps and you get to A minor 7th. There's not a single black key in an A minor 7th. It's A, C, E, and G flat, or I'm sorry, G. That's an A minor 7th. That's how much easier it is than this nightmare. And you just make the change. You keep everything after the letter, the minor 7, but you change the letter according to the number of half steps that you have to move. An E 7th becomes a G 7th. And you go through the whole song that way. And when you're done, you have the entire melody of the song in the key of C. You have all the chords also in the key, basically in the key of C, although, you build the chords off of different scales, F, A, G. But that's what you're going to memorize in the chord book. And when you're done, you have the entire song, Amazing Grace, in the key of C. And now you can play it, and you can play it pretty easily because in the first place, you know how to read these notes in the key of C. There's no sharps or flats anywhere, whereas in this one, there's every one of these notes is affected by these three sharps. If it's a note that corresponds to this sharp, like C, every C is a C sharp. And down here, you don't have any of that. So it's incredibly simple to read these notes once you know what this note looks like on the keyboard, which goes way back to the beginning of this program. These you've memorized. You got 32 of them you have to learn, and you know which notes to hit. So, in effect, you have bagged everything you need to play Amazing Grace in the key of C. And the only adjustment you have to make when you're looking at a songbook is to count the number of half steps it takes from the key that it's written in, and you can use the very first note of the music if you want. Be sure to pay attention to sharps and flats. Whatever that first note is, make sure that you sharp it or flat it if it's required. And you count the number of half steps to the closest C. If the song is written in G flat or F sharp, God forbid, it would be easiest to count down 6 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to get to C. And you would do that for every note, and you would do it for every chord. But you have to go down, that's one of the worst, if not, that's the worst there is 6 half steps, and that's transposing from F sharp or G flat to the key of C. And the reason it's best to go down is because if you went up, you'd have to go 7 half steps up to get to C. If you start out in F sharp, you only have to go down 6 half steps. That also means that anything you get out of a songbook that's written in F, until you're much better, you count down 5 half steps. If it's in E, you count down 4 half steps. If it's in E flat, you count down 3, D, 2, C sharp, 1, and now you're back to C. So anything lower than F sharp that it's written in, you would count down to C. Anything G or above, if you're still not able to play in the key of G, you would count up, starting with the key of G would be 5 half steps. A flat would be 4 half steps. A would be exactly what I did here, 3 half steps. That's my sample, your sample. And what I tried to say at the beginning was, it's tedious and it's time consuming, but it's also simple. It's not a complex formula. You don't have to know algebra. You don't have to know geometry. You don't have to know anything except counting. Well, if you're in F sharp, you got to go up 6, down 6, so you need 2 hands. Anything other than that, all you need are your digits, your fingers. This also was digitally enhanced by me. So anyway, that's how you would transpose anything into the key of C. And even though it's tedious, I have done it, I can't tell you how many thousands of times I have transposed things. And I'm going to show you an example of how all of this stuff I've been talking about from the very beginning, how I have personally put it to use and just had a 10-ring circus doing it, even though the tedium would get old having to do this, but nonetheless, it's so essential to get everything into a key that isn't difficult, and that's exactly what I've tried to show you how to do it. So with that, you now have every tool that I use to play by ear. I told you earlier that I would show you a couple of examples of how I've put this to use. And let me see. I started out, as a jazz musician at age 15. And then I moved to the boondocks of Colorado. And even though there was no place to play professionally, no nightclubs, no jazz clubs, nothing like that, I did develop a very tiny reputation as being a fairly accomplished pianist, non-reading type. And the local community theater director asked me if I would do the music for a stage play called Camelot. Camelot runs over 3 hours. Because I had had almost no opportunity to perform for a number of years, I jumped at the chance and I immediately said I'd love to do it. That was the first mistake because it turned out to be a huge undertaking, and I'll show you why. The director, the first thing she did was hand me the entire score of the show. Now, like I said, Camelot runs over 3 hours, which is a tremendous amount of music, and a lot of wonderful music. And here's what she handed me. And it just goes on and on and on in every key imaginable, page after page after page. And I can't read music. I mean, not well enough to even hardly begin to cope with this in the keys they were written in. And when she handed me this, I was almost sick to my stomach. I realized I had bitten off an awful lot to chew. I also realized that in a show like that, you have a cast of, maybe 50 people. And we had a chorus of about 20 people. And everything is focused on timing. When a certain actor said a certain line, that was my cue to begin a certain song. And none of that was included in here. All this tons and tons of music, there are no cues in there at all. It doesn't say start this song when King Arthur says it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I don't think that was King Arthur's line, but I forgot what his name is. Anyway, none of the cues are in here. And I had to have cues. I had to know when to start each song. I had to know how to play it in the proper key, especially with the chorus. I had to play it the same way each time because a chorus cannot cope with a whole lot of creativity on the part of the accompanist. You have to keep it as simple as possible for them. And so I was just up to my ears in trouble. So I came up with my own version of a script for the entire show that covered all the music and all the cues. And it turned out to be 14 folders. Here's a folder. Now the reason I did it in folders is because I did not want to have a page turner sitting next to me through a 3-hour show. So with 13 of these, 14 of them, this is what the first folder looked like after the overture. These are speeches, and these are the last words before I had to start playing Camelot, which I played in the key of F. And I knew the melody, especially by the time I prepared these, which was just a few weeks before the show. For several months, we had rehearsed the show, and I already knew the melody to Camelot in my head. So I didn't need to put any treble clef. I didn't need to show melody notes. All I needed was the lyrics, because the melody was absolutely locked in my head. And then I needed the chord symbols. So all that you see here are lyrics and the chord symbols. But I needed those chord symbols because it's easy to make a mistake. And for here, in this particular part of Camelot, it changes from the key of F to the key of D. I don't show it because I didn't have to have a treble clef for any of the melody. Then it's interrupted here, and then it starts again here. Then there's more speeches over here. Then the music starts in F again, still Camelot. And then there's a reprise of Camelot. And then I continue quietly, and at the very end, it says, there's a scene change at that point, and it says no scene change music. That means I could quietly fold this back up and throw it aside and pull out the next folder. At least one of these is 5 cards wide, which fills the entire piano. And it has a piano rack right above the keyboard. And it literally ran from the lowest note on the piano to the highest note on the piano because it was five of these cards. Again, these songs I had memorized the melody so thoroughly that I didn't need any of the melody, none of the treble clefs. And it just goes on and on and on like that for over 3 hours. But there's one that I held back for your benefit. And that was the very first one. And it happens to be 4 cards wide. So it spanned most of the piano. And here's what it looked like. Again, I had memorized the melody over months of practicing. But in this particular card, or this portion of it, this is right at the very beginning of the show. And one of these songs, I think it's this one, I Wonder What the King is Doing Tonight. And it's in the key of C. No surprise there. Okay, and the King Arthur who had to sing it had no trouble with the key of C. If he had had trouble with it, I would have transposed it into the key of G or F and simply told him, you've got three choices, Tom, C, G, and F, and if you can't do it in one of those keys, then you need to find another job. Now let me show you, no, it was the second song that Guinevere sings right after King Arthur finishes I Wonder What the King Is Doing Tonight. Guinevere pipes in and sings The Simple Joys of Maidenhood. And it starts immediately after the king is done singing. This is the end of I Wonder What the King Is Doing Tonight. It says, next song starts immediately, The Simple Joys of Maidenhood. And it is in the key of C also. And Guinevere had the same choice. If she wanted it in G or F, I could do it. And if she didn't like C, G, or F, then it was time for her to find a different job. Now, let me show you what was given to me in that gigantic folder that the director first gave me. And I pulled it out of that stack that I just showed you. And here's the song that I had to play. And I want you to look at this. It's in the key of B. If there is a worse key on the piano to play, I don't know what it is, honestly. Key of B has 5 sharps. Every chord is an absolute nightmare. I don't know that it would take me a day just to figure out how to read the melody of this song because it's in such a terrible, terrible key. And not only is it in a terrible key, the composer down here decided that this should all be in the key of B, but right here we want to change to the key of E flat, which is not easy. And that goes on for that staff, and that staff. And then we go back to the key of B again. And if I showed you the chords that went with this, which are not even on here, I had to figure those out by ear, essentially, and by listening to the music over and over and over again on a cassette player. And not only did I have to figure out the chords, I had to transpose it all to the key of C, which is what I did. And so that really is the first example of how incredibly useful two things are: the key of C and transposing to the key of C. And all of those folders have the cues in them that tell me when I need to start each song, whether I need to play it loud or soft. If there's dialogue on the stage, then it would be played soft so that the audience could hear the dialogue. If there was no dialogue, most of the time I was playing pretty loud so that they could hear it. And I've shown you everything you need to know to do what I just did. Now, in the case of The Simple Joys of Maidenhood, the second one that was written in B, the key of B, transposing it was fairly simple. I learned it by listening to the music on a cassette player. That was initially how I learned it. Transposing it was very, very simple. I had to go up one lousy half step. And that's another example of why in God's name would a composer put it in the god-awful key of B, which is just filled with sharps. And all they had to do was to go up one half step and put it in the key of C and make it readable for almost everybody. And I actually find that somewhat offensive. But I'm not in charge. So the struggle, the biggest struggle I had was that by listening to it, I had to figure out the chords. And I'm pretty sure I transposed the melody into the key of C first, so I could play it, just the melody, one note at a time. And then, because I play by ear, and which is what you're going to do, I had to poke around to find the chords that went with the notes. And eventually it becomes relatively easy. Sometimes I have to hunt long and hard to find the right chord. But usually, if I've heard the song performed frequently enough, I can almost picture the chords as the music unfolds on a cassette player. The second example I want to show you of how I have personally used everything that I've been trying to show you is an ongoing project that I'm way behind on. And it's basically my repertoire. It's songs that either I immensely enjoy playing or songs that people persistently request when I'm playing in like a piano lounge or something like that. And some of them I almost beg people not to ask for, but they ask anyway. Yellow Rose of Texas is high on my list of songs I don't want to play, but I can play them. And so when a Texan sits down at the piano across from me with his 15th cocktail of the evening and asks for the Yellow Rose of Texas, you don't argue, you just play the damn thing. This is my repertoire. To give you an idea of how many are on here, there are 59 songs alone that start with the letter I. It's in alphabetical order. 59 I's. And so there's quite a large number of songs in here. I'll start with the very first one, which is A Child is Born. Now I want you can look, this is the title of the song. This is the key that I play it in. Is this right here. I want you to look at what key I play in. C, F, C, 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 and F. Amazing Grace I play in a whole bunch of keys. C, 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 D minor, C, A minor. There's very few minors on there too, and that's why I didn't focus on trying to include that in playing by ear. Then I realized that there are some songs that I simply struggle with both the melody and the chords, not necessarily throughout the song, but at too many places in the song. And there are songs where I would only get confused in the bridge, which is, most of the songs I play consist of three parts: the chorus again, then what's called the bridge, and then the chorus a third time. And that's this format of jillions of songs that were written in the 30s and 40s. They also had a huge number of songs with introductions, and most of the introductions have disappeared. I think I play a couple songs that I know the introduction. One of them is T for Two, which has a neat introduction, and it's still fairly common. But there are thousands of songs from the 30s and 40s where the introduction simply isn't ever performed. But this first one, A Child is Born, I learned it fairly recently in life, which is recently in my life is totally different than yours. And it has a lot of strange chords in it. And I had to write out the entire song. So it took me all this, 2/3 of this page, just to cover this song, A Child is Born in the Key of C. And like the first chord is a C major chord, which is easy. The second chord is a C sharp major 7th. Well, that doesn't just jump off the page at you. And there's B flat 7th, F major 7th, B flat 7th. There's just enough problems in it that I needed the whole song. So I wrote out the melody, which is the treble clef, and I wrote out the chord symbols. And I include the measures, because its Child is Born is in 3/4 time. And that's the entire song. Now we got down to All the Things You Are, which is a wonderful song from the 30s, I think, maybe the 40s. I play it in the key of C, and this is the basic chords of the chorus, and this is the chords of the bridge, right here. That's all. I also have been known to play the correct chorus to a song twice and somehow play the bridge from a totally different song where the correct bridge belonged, and I never played it, and then I go back and play the chorus. Fortunately, the vast majority of people don't notice that sort of thing. But there's A Love Affair to Remember, chords, always chords, Arthur's Theme, the chords, As Long as He Needs Me is the chords, A Taste of Honey. It just goes on. And as a matter of fact, I used so much of this sheet doing A Child is Born, I was still doing A's, and I got to A Time for Love, and I had to write it all out because it was very newly learned. Autumn in New York. These are all still A's. And then all of the B songs, I only needed help with some of them. I start out at the top of this page with Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine. And then there's Back Home Again, Baubles, Bangles, and Beads, Bluesette. I had to write out all of Bluesette. I had to write out a bunch of Blue Skies. You know, that's blue skies shining on me, nothing but blue skies. And this is why I say it's an ongoing, unfinished project. There's more music that I have written, but I'm not going to try to leaf through all those pages. A lot of them I've just written the first couple lyrics and the chords. So in terms of personally using everything I have tried to show you, this and Camelot are the shining examples of how useful the tools are. And I think I'm getting very near the end. As a matter of fact, I'm done. I don't know how many sessions we've been through. I wish I could teach you to play by ear, but I can't, and nobody else can. I've explained to you why teachers, music professors, want nothing to do with you playing by ear and are actually hostile to it. I've told you that I don't play for money. I don't play for applause. I play in the hope that I will touch someone so deeply with what I play that they will actually shed a tear. And when you see that, it's absolutely the most wonderful feeling you'll ever have in terms of playing the piano and entertaining people. If you've made it this far, I have almost no doubt that you can play by ear. It's kind of hard work. Nothing I have done and nothing you can do should involve computers, mixers, lighted keyboards, amplifiers, pyrotechnics, laser lighting, strobe lighting, face paint, shirtless guitars, drummers with 18 cymbals, and countless other gimmicks that have, to a sizable extent, to me, almost ruined music. It's just so filled with gimmicks, it's beyond belief. That's why I was so proud of my pointer, because, like I said, it's probably one of the first tools ever invented in China, and a lot of firsts came from China, and I'm guessing this chopsticks was 4,000 years ago, maybe. So it's a long way from there to a computer. Now, I have one last tip, and I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't emphasize it, and I want to emphasize it. Anytime you listen to any music, I don't care where you are, whether it's in your car, whether you're in your home, whether you're wherever you are, if you're in a position where you don't have to deal with other people minute by minute, and you don't have to concentrate on anything but the music, I want you to listen to the music, pretend that it is in the key of C, which you should know backward and forward. And I want you to try to picture the keys that you would be hitting for the melody. And I want you to listen to what the chords sound like on the recording that you're listening to. I do this all the time. I mean, I can't listen to music without doing exactly that. Invariably, I put it in the key of C, regardless of where a woman is singing it or an orchestra is playing it. And I picture the notes on the keyboard. I don't picture them on sheet music. I just picture them on the keyboard. And then I try to feel the sound of the chords. And if it's not a complex chord, if you're pretending it's in C major and they play a C major chord, that's not complicated. And you know what a C major chord is supposed to sound like. And it's a pretty chord, for example, compared to a C minor chord, which is not as pretty. If it's a relatively easy song, you'll be able to actually make a huge amount of progress. And I hope you'll try to do that, because I do it all the time, and it's very, very useful. And if I decide to learn a song, it's extremely useful, because I've already pictured the melody and felt a fairly good idea of what the chords should be. So that's all I can tell you. And if you start trying, and you try hard, and you work at it, not on any schedule at all, start with the scales and go from there, you really can change your life beyond your wildest dreams. And I hope that in some way, maybe I've contributed to those dreams. Thank you for putting up with me all these hours. And best wishes and good luck. Thank you for watching.